There is so much to discuss in response to the Switch 2 presentation, but one aspect I particularly wanted to draw people's attention to is the Ask the Developer interviews with the three leads of development for the Nintendo Switch 2. So in this video, I'm going to go through the interview, and we won't read everything, but we will read many of the main parts and discuss and contextualize what's being said. If you would rather check out the original interview first without me talking all over it, I will link it below. But let's begin by looking at the actual credits for the people involved, which themselves are very intriguing. First, we have Koichi Kawamoto from EPD. Now, it's curious that they have not given Kawamoto-san a number for his production group, though we know he's been attached to Group 4. Regrettably, I think they're going to be tightening up on the specifics of how their teams are reorganized, as their credits have actually given quite a few behind the scenes changes away. But I do think there are going to be, in any event, some major behind the scenes shakeups in the way that these teams are structured over the next few years. I will cycle back to that in a future video, but note also that Tetsuya Sasaki is credited as the Technology Development Division, when we know as recently as the Alamo Ask the Developer interviews at the end of last year that this group contains at least one technology development group, because they were credited as Group 1, suggesting, of course, that there could be 2, 3, 4 or more. My hunch is that they made a decision not to share this level of detail from now, and so I don't think we will know any longer the numbers of the groups that are associated with each type of game. General introductions give us an idea of the background of these people. Kawamoto says, "As the producer for Switch 2, my role was to set the direction for what kind of system to develop and to consult with the hardware development department and other teams on the detailed specifications. This, of course, is the role that Yoshiaki Koizumi was given by Satoru Iwata before he died for the original Switch, and I have a future video exploring exactly how that went. Still, the fact that someone immersed in the EPD4 group, the team behind 1-2-Switch, Labo, Ring Fit, Switch Sports and more, means that all of these technological innovations are bound to be well supported by at least one team within Nintendo. However, Takahiro Dota's history is far more in the field of mainstream gaming, Tears of the Kingdom and such like, and I quite like that this team is a complementary mix of experience of innovation-focused software development, traditional core game development, and hardware innovations. So firstly, they date the beginning of the project as 2019, although apparently initial thoughts had begun before that. What's curious is that this is about the same time period that it took before the Switch was devised after the Wii U. Around 2014 was when they lit the blue touch paper on that, 2 years after their previous new system launched. This despite the fact that they anticipated the Switch to last significantly longer, even back in 2019. Sasaki makes a good point here though. He says, "Hardware development takes time, and if we didn't start early, the software development environment, known as the software development kit that's needed afterwards, wouldn't be ready in time. We started by actively gathering information each day on different kinds of technology and the results they could achieve. In that sense, you could say that we began the development even before 2019. I think with the expedited development time of games, it must be even more critical that they start development early. Still, one wonders whether at a certain stage in the system's evolution, there was indeed a thought to do a pro version of the original Switch, which got shelved as time went on. It's unlikely we'll ever know for sure, at least not until people retire and are a bit more free to talk, but considering Dota's experiences on Tears of the Kingdom as he describes them, he says, "However, as software developers continue to take on these kinds of challenges, their technical capabilities improve and ideas expand, and then what they hope to do ends up surpassing what the hardware processing power can handle. Hardware with an expanded processing capability is a blessing for software developers who want to challenge themselves to create new gameplay experiences that are unimaginable today. It's very much a processing power focus first, albeit through the prism of creating games to surprise and delight. I admit I laughed at Kawamoto's description of this particular upside of Switch 2's power level. He said, "To give you some examples, in Donkey Kong Bonanza, you can experience the exhilaration of being able to destroy anything you want in the game without restrictions. Of course, this is also a low-key hint as to the defining mechanic of the new DK, a game I'm particularly curious and excited about, but which must be the topic of yet another separate video. Also mentioned is the seamless connection of the Mario Kart World courses. Impressively, the Nintendo interviewer asks what I guess they know will be the question on everybody's lips: why isn't this as innovative as past Nintendo consoles? Kawamoto's response will, I guess, be the template for the corporate messaging on this in public events going forward. He said, "From Nintendo DS to Wii U, we offered new ways to play by implementing hardware features that weren't typical for games consoles at the time and our software developers to take advantage of them. However, with Switch, we made that less of a priority. With Switch, we prioritize implementing something that could be used with any kind of software, such as the ability to play in both TV mode and handheld mode, rather than tasking software developers to create gameplay experiences that incorporate the hardware's unique features. Just like we did with Switch, we've made having unique hardware features less of a priority for this console. Of course, we did consider various ideas. However, we felt that even if an idea works well for some games, there'll be a lot of games where it doesn't. Also, we thought a lot about whether we should change the design of Switch, a console with a screen and Joy-Con controllers on each side that can be played on a TV when docked. After considering various new ideas, we decided it would be best to keep the Switch system's design and not make any change for change's sake." I think it's very interesting that he points to Nintendo DS to Wii U as the specific period when they were focusing on implementing hardware features, as this was a particular period of time in Nintendo's history where they moved towards the blue ocean strategy, and it seems perhaps that they have moved on to a third new stage in their video game development journey now. Dota's view is also far more conservative than previously we've expected of Nintendo. He said, "However, since the Switch launched, I think there's been a shift in how software developers create games. Rather than leveraging hardware features to create something unique, developers can now choose which software technologies they want to incorporate to make their game stand out. My honest opinion as a software developer is that just because a new hardware feature is added, it doesn't necessarily mean that various problems will be solved or that new kinds of gameplay experiences will be created one after another. So, with Switch 2, we improved its processing speed in the hope that it'll become a dedicated game platform with a strong and solid foundation that allows software developers to create what they want." This is pretty interesting. I guess I can see that at this power level, they really do have the flexibility for developers to go and do almost whatever they want, and so facilitating that freedom is perhaps more important than giving a bold new type of technology. On the other hand, Nintendo always had the opportunity to compete simply on power. They just chose not to as part of their blue ocean strategy, so I feel this answer kind of obscures some corporate positioning. Actually, the key reason for the change is supplied, I think, by Kawamoto. There have been cases, he says, such as the Ring-Con in Ring Fit Adventure, where we've offered a unique experience by including an accessory with the game, and it was well received by players, so we wondered whether Switch 2 would really need a new hardware feature. Basically, accessories. Accessories are going to be key. They were quite common on Wii, but with odd exceptions like Labo, Ring Fit, and the leg strap for Switch Sports, we haven't seen many of these kinds of accessory-wielding titles until now. But I expect this to be the new way that Nintendo gets to burnish its reputation for innovation. The next section of the interview focuses mostly on technical specs. I'll await a more Digital Foundry themed take, really, but this comment of Sasaki was particularly interesting. He said, "As a side note, the tech savvy among you might already be aware, but Nintendo has always developed each new gaming system with a focus on its system memory capacity. This time, we were particularly aggressive in pursuing increased memory size. Apart from the processor, there's also the LCD screen, internal memory, storage, and of course, each feature involves cost and memory capacity, so we had to strike a balance when powering up the system. The battery capacity is given as 1.2 times that of the Switch, although he doesn't actually confirm which model Switch. The 2017 Switch was significantly less powerful in battery terms than the 2019 so-called Red Box revision. They also address the need for the micro SD express card, essentially to do with transfer speeds. 256 gigabytes seems like a lot of storage, but if they're going down a route of encouraging digital purchases, and particularly if third-party games are less optimized than first-party Switch titles usually are, I can see this becoming tricky to manage. One feature of the design appears to follow from the functionality, the rounded designs of the Joy-Con. Kawamoto noted of adjusting to the larger size of the system, but if we simply stretch Switch System's Joy-Cons vertically, they'd end up being very difficult to hold, as your fingers wouldn't be able to reach the L and R buttons, and they wouldn't fit the shapes of your palms. That's why we lengthened the L and R buttons, rounded off the bottom corners, and experimented with various placements of the control sticks and buttons, right down to the millimeter or less, to arrive at the shape and layout we have now. They also christen HD Rumble 2, which apparently is even better than HD Rumble. Twice as many ice. Kawamoto shares. The HD Rumble in the Joy-Con controllers for Switch was able to create different sensations of touch, but because of the size of the Joy-Con itself, we weren't able to make the vibration as strong as in the controllers for Nintendo GameCube. However, the HD Rumble 2 that's installed this time not only provides stronger vibration, but also feels more realistic and has quicker response times. The hardware features of Switch 2, including Joy-Con 2, are introduced in Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour, so we hope that everyone will try them out. They also reiterate a point I've made before, which is that magnets were the original concept for the Switch, and indeed Yoshiaki Koizumi once recounted that the Switch Snap originally came from the sounds that the magnets made, and they actually engineered this sound specifically for the Switch Run Rail system because they liked it so much. Dota notes, everyone on the technology development team fine-tuned it, right down to the satisfying snap feeling when you attach the controllers to the console. I think this has become a key element that symbolizes Nintendo Switch 2. I also enjoyed this comment from Kawamoto on the origins of the mouse idea. He says, "It wasn't in the initial planning, but when I was playing a PC game using a mouse, the idea struck me that maybe the Joy-Con controllers could also be used as mice. Switch 2 was originally designed to support a wider range of games by improving the system's processing speed, so with that in mind, I thought it would be better to be able to play interesting games that require a mouse. Implementing mouse control that's widely used nowadays in the Joy-Con controllers isn't that costly, and I think that's exactly what lateral thinking of withered technology is all about. I thought it was a great idea, so I proposed it to the technology development department, and they were like, oh, we've been thinking about that for ages." He also explains more about the games that can utilize it, saying, "Using Metroid Prime 4 Beyond as an example, especially since there are two controllers, you can use the left Joy-Con 2 to move your character around with the control stick, while using the right Joy-Con 2 as a mouse to aim and shoot. By using two Joy-Con 2 controllers, we can make games like Dragon Drive, and we can even create gameplay experiences where two players use mouse controls, like in Super Mario Party Jamboree, Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, plus Jamboree TV. What a mouthful. This makes it possible to enjoy a wider variety of games. It's also addressed that this allows a closer approximation of touchscreen mode. As you may know, they say, the Switch screen supports touch controlled, but it can only be used in handheld mode and tabletop mode. When you change it to TV mode, the touch screen function is not available. The same goes for Switch 2, but I think the mouse functionality can also serve as a substitute for the touchscreen, as it allows you to point to a spot on the TV similar to the cursor for Wii Remote, although it's not quite the same thing. I also really love this Iwata anecdote. That reminds me, when we were developing Switch, we were wondering whether to remove the touchscreen function as it can't be used in TV mode. But then Iwata-san said, "I'm sure there will be games that make use of it, so why not keep it?" So we kept it. This makes sense and does show Iwata's pragmatism. As it happens, since I play in handheld mode a lot, I use the touchscreen quite consistently, and it would seem a shame for the Switch to lose features. I still mourn the loss of the analog triggers from the GameCube. So, hooray for Iwata. The Pro controller is also redesigned with quieter sticks, and so-called smooth gliding in the handles are seemingly more comfortable. Rather surprisingly, there are exclusive buttons, GL and GR, which are exclusive to the Pro controller, as well as the Joy-Con 2 charging grip, which is sold separately. So much, I guess, for the original Joy-Con charging grip, with Super Mario Party Jamboree being forward compatible for anybody who floated that concept. It seems that you can use them to assign buttons, but I'm not quite sure how widely customizable this will be. The example given is having a bespoke capture button, but since they already have a capture button, albeit I guess in a less accessible place, this seems a little bit of an odd move, and I almost wonder if it's something one of their third-party collaborators asked for as a feature for some reason, though it can't be used too heavily since not everybody will play with a Pro controller. We get a fascinating bit of Switch 1 development lore in the next section though. This is the button you press to use Game Chat, they say. One of the Nintendo Switch 2 system's new features. Nintendo Switch supports voice chat via the Nintendo Switch Online smartphone app, but we originally wanted to include it as a feature of the system itself. However, with the Switch system's processing capability, it was difficult to implement a voice chat feature without affecting games, so we decided to offer it via a smart device. With Switch 2, we were able to include it as a standard feature of the device. I'm sure many of you have had experiences of playing games together as children at a friend's house or in a student lounge where everyone brought their own consoles, and we wanted to recreate that feeling online. Sometimes you'd all play the same game together, but there were also times when everyone gathered around even though they were each playing their own game. It also seemed that COVID influenced the evolution of the playing together feature, they said. There's also a new feature that's been added to the console, which was born from our experience developing software remotely for a time due to COVID-19. Back then, we were using video conferencing system to check the software we were developing with our team, but the screen sharing functionality built into the video conferencing system only allowed us to share one game screen at a time. So, we had each person place their game screen in front of their camera instead of their faces. When we did that, it felt like we were all in the same place, each bringing our own console to play the game together, which was a lot of fun. Based on this experience, we proposed adding a feature to Switch 2 where people can share their gameplay screen with other players. I think this is a really nice feature myself, and while it's not currently something that I would use too much, I can imagine as more people adopt it and it becomes more standard, it could be a really nice way to keep people connected and discussing while playing. Many single-player games are by their nature solo experiences, and yet this really does allow for friendship groups to have different interests and different games, and yet still share, lean over, and communicate. I think it's a great innovation that I am intrigued to see utilised. Dota compares Game Chat to being as innovative as the hybrid console itself, and while at first this seems hyperbolic, I do tend to see his point. As he says, Game Chat inherently adds value and is automatically available for all games that are compatible with Switch 2. Of course, you can use it to play online with friends, but even with single-player games, you can share your screen with others and get them to help you come up with strategies or give you tips when you're stuck. Or if you see your friend playing a game that you aren't familiar with, it may spark your interest in that game, and you can ask. That way, whenever a game is released for Switch 2, value is added automatically without the software developers having to put in special effort. I think it would be fair to say that this feature represents a true progression from Nintendo Switch, which added the value of enjoying a home console gaming experience on the go and will be something unique to the successor. For this reason, we felt it was worth implementing in Switch 2. This from Sasaki is also a telling comment. We also think it's essential to have a feature that software developers can benefit from without any additional effort. As video conferencing has become more common throughout the world in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, there are now more diverse demands and expectations for video call systems. However, when deciding on Game Chat's features and which of those demands we could meet, we had to be careful, as devoting too much processing power to Game Chat would affect how much is left over for games. Fortunately or unfortunately, we had a group of fussy software developers who were very vocal with us, so we were able to strike a good balance. I think our company has a workplace culture where developers can devote themselves to creating uniquely Nintendo products because they don't hold back when sharing their opinions with us. Here's a curious comment on the camera as well. Kawamoto says, if you connect the Nintendo Switch 2 camera, a Switch 2 accessory that's sold separately, your face will appear on your game screen. What I found interesting was this makes you feel a bit like a live streamer. This kind of pleasant moment was not something we anticipated in the early stages of development. My question is then, if they didn't think of it as being like a live streamer, what did they envisage? Again, this is a topic for another video another day, but suffice to say, I don't think we've even scratched the surface of the power of that camera. That said, because the system is so pricey, I expect that they will wait for the camera to be more widely adopted before developing too many games for it. Also curious for what's not said is in this comment from Sasaki about the noise cancelling capabilities of the new microphone. He says, the software developers' requests regarding this noise cancelling feature were also interesting. They wanted the vacuum cleaner's noise to be minimized, but they didn't want the player's excitement, such as applaud and cheers, to be cancelled out. Deciding which sounds to let through and which not to, and the development needed to achieve this selective noise cancellation feature was extremely challenging. There was a whole stack of other requests too. One wonders what those other requests were. Knowing that previous microphones have been used for all sorts of purposes, from blowing flowers to singing, in Nintendo games I mean of course, I suspect that we will see a lot more from the software team. In fact, I reckon we'll see some features of this incorporated as soon as Donkey Kong Bonanza, given the likely involvement of EPD8, who really enjoy this kind of innovative technology. It also seems that multiple people can use the mic, and although it will block background noise, it will capture excitement, which is great. There's also a hint that the interviewer will talk to other developers involved in game chat, which will be exciting to see as well. It seems the idea of game streaming from the Switch 2 was originally conceived for the Wii. Kawamoto recounts, even when we were developing Switch, we wanted to implement a feature to share gameplay with other systems in addition to sharing Joy-Con. In the past, Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS had a feature called Download Play, where you could send a portion of a game to friends and play together. We looked at the possibility of having this feature on Switch as well, but the data volume of Switch games is so large that it takes a very long time to transfer data, so we had to abandon this idea. So, we thought that by taking advantage of the Switch 2 system's processing power and using the same streaming technology that Wii U uses to send images from the console to the handheld Wii U gamepad, we could share the gameplay instantly without having to take time to transfer the software. I thought it would be nice if players could share games instantly and play together competitively or cooperatively. This was another feature I asked Sasaki-san to look into. Achieving it must have been a nightmare. Luckily, Sasaki-san was prepared, recalling, those of us in the technology department want to be able to say, we thought you'd need something like this when a new request comes in, so we're always researching and developing all kinds of things in advance. Such a wireless streaming feature that enables players to share their games via streaming is something we've been researching for a long time. We realized we could achieve this by taking advantage of the latest technology in wireless streaming communications, which in turn allowed us to come up with a new way of sharing games. So, this is really interesting in terms of what GameShare actually does. With this new feature, which we call GameShare, you can share selected parts of supportive games with up to 3 people. In other words, up to 4 people can now play together using just one copy of the game. Using GameShare to play with others locally works just like Download Play, which was available on some of our previous consoles, but what separates it is that you can start playing right away. Selected parts of supported games. My wild theory here has always been that they could share out sections of even Switch 2 exclusive games as essentially demos, and this suggests that it's possible that they could create this functionality. Dota notes, what's interesting about this is, when using GameShare locally, some games can be shared to both multiple Switch 2 and Switch consoles. Even if you decide to purchase Switch 2, your old Nintendo Switch could still come in handy. In addition, you can share games online using Game Chat. If one person has the game, up to 4 people can play it together while using voice chat. Game Chat is a feature that's exclusive to Switch 2, so online game sharing will only be available among Switch 2 consoles. Now, it's difficult to imagine that they can use the original Switches to stream Mario Kart, but if there are particular modes within many early Switch 2 games that can be shared with Switch, this could be pretty awesome. The team note the technical difficulties that the innovation presented, with Kawamoto noting, It wasn't an easy thing to do. The quality of the game image is reduced when it's transferred using streaming technology, so the team tried to find a way to maintain the quality as much as possible through trial and error. Also, with game share, there are games where it's better if players aren't shown the same screen, so we've created a feature that enables each person to see a different screen even if they're playing together with just one copy of the game. For example, when playing card games and Mahjong in Clubhouse Game 51 Worldwide Classics, each player is shown a different screen because it wouldn't work if everyone was showing the same screen. So, with GameShare, you can play cards or Mahjong with players locally or those connected online via game chat right away. It sounds like Rhythm Heaven with GameShare is a no-no, as they specifically mention games which require specific quick responses and that these won't work. I guess that rules out Mario Kart and Smash 2, although curiously those examples are not used. The team also go into backward compatibility. I know that backward compatibility has been assumed for a long time, but MBG did a very interesting YouTube video discussing from a game creator's perspective the technical hurdles such a functionality presents, and the team here reiterate that they didn't go down the route of simply having Switch 1 emulated on Switch 2. Apparently, it's halfway between technical compatibility and an emulator. Sasaki notes, this is getting a bit technical, but the process of converting game data for Switch to run on Switch 2 is performed on a real-time basis as the data is read in. Although we'd made the technological preparations at first, we weren't quite sure whether it would be able to maintain proper compatibility. Good news also on the Switch games running better on Switch 2 front. There are some games that ran well due to the Switch system's hardware configuration. Switch 2, on the other hand, has increased processing capabilities and an expanded memory capacity, which could theoretically cause some of those games to stop working. We weren't so confident at first, but as we tested games one by one, we found that some issues could be solved by making improvements. This process helped us build confidence that, while we might not be able to solve everything, we can work it out for most games. Apparently, they're checking more than 10,000 games for compatibility, quite a task. Sadly, Labo won't be able to be compatible due to the requirements of the Joy-Con sizes, but I think we all expected that to be the case. Curiously though, Ring Fit isn't mentioned, though I assume it too would be problematic. Of future developments to improve Switch games, Dota notes, it's safe to say that the Switch 2 is a system with strength in the sense that it adds value to Switch games that players already own. We'll take advantage of those strengths in the future to further enhance the gameplay experience of Switch games. We believe there are many things we can do, such as making Switch games compatible with GameShare through free updates, as well as leveraging Switch 2's processing power to enable games to run in higher resolution and with a smoother frame rate. Seemingly, it will be easier to transfer saved data to Switch 2, although the specifics remain to be seen. Dota also puts in a plug for those virtual game cards. Speaking of transferring, I expect many people who buy a Switch 2 will already own a Switch. They might wonder which system they should play their digital games, but with virtual game cards, they can load and eject games between Switch and Switch 2 just like you would a physical game card. This feature can be used among Switch systems as well as Switch 2 systems. We originally developed it with the idea in mind that many players will continue to play both Switch and Switch 2 after Switch 2 has launched, so you can continue to keep both systems. Also confirmed is a new eShop and a new Game Finds For You feature. Thanks to the system's performance capabilities, Nintendo eShop on Switch 2 has been improved and runs smoothly, even when displaying a large number of games. We believe the act of finding the game you want to play is itself part of the game system experience. That was from Dota, with Kawamoto adding, although there's a feature on Nintendo eShop called Game Finds For You, which lets you quickly see screenshots and watch introduction videos for games. And of course, they wrestled with the same question we all did. What could the new system be called? Super Switch was indeed mooted, as they say. We even considered ideas like Super Nintendo Switch. However, Super NES, which came out after the NES, couldn't play NES games. Since Switch 2 can play Switch games, it didn't feel right to use the same naming convention as the Super NES. Switch 2 is a new system with improved performance, but we'd like players who get their hands on it not to focus on the specs, but rather to think of it as the latest system developed by Nintendo. So in the hopes that it becomes the new standard for Nintendo Switch, we named it Nintendo Switch 2. Thanks so much for watching, and I've got a lot of other videos recently in the current flurry of news regarding Switch 2, so thank you as ever, and I will be back soon for another Nintendo Forecast.